What kind of criminal hacks his own FBI file? Inside a dimly lit FBI field office, the night stretches long and heavy. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzes overhead as weary agents shuffle through stacks of paperwork, their faces marked by exhaustion and determination. Coffee cups, half empty and stained, litter the desks, silent witnesses to countless sleepless hours spent chasing shadows. On one wall, a grid of most wanted photographs glares back, each face a story of danger, violence, and evasion. One photo in particular dominates the space. His face, sharp eyes, a hardened jawline, the kind of look that's been etched into the minds of law enforcement and media alike. He's not just another name on a list. He's the top target, a ghost haunting the headlines, the subject of urgent briefings in Washington, a topic of heated debates during late-night strategy sessions. The pressure is relentless. Every agent in the room feels it, the weight of expectation to capture a man whose unpredictability has shattered every attempt to pin him down. Intelligence reports paint him as elusive, dangerous, and unrelenting. The FBI is convinced they know his patterns, his connections, his weaknesses. But beneath the layers of information, a crucial mistake festers. Cut to a small, shadowed room somewhere deep within the city's underbelly. The glow of a stolen FBI terminal paints a pale light across a single figure, calm and focused. The man on the screen is the same face that haunts the field office, but here, he is no fugitive running blind. He watches his own most wanted profile with an unreadable expression. Instead of fear or desperation, there's a calculated stillness, a mind racing through every detail the system holds about him. His height, weight, scars, past addresses, known associates, patterns of crimes. Each data point a thread in the web the FBI believes they've spun around him. But he sees beyond the surface. He understands that the FBI doesn't truly know who he is. They only know who they think he is. And in that assumption lies their vulnerability. Tonight, he doesn't plan to run, hide, or disappear into the shadows. He plans to infiltrate the very system hunting him, to rewrite the narrative, to manipulate the data, and to create a new reality under the FBI's own authority. With a few keystrokes, he can erase himself from their minds and invent a ghost for them to chase. That night, he didn't disappear from the FBI. He became the one who decided what the FBI believed. But before we dive deeper, take a moment to settle in. What's coming next isn't just a continuation. It's a turning point. The layers you think you understand will start to shift, and the game will change in ways you didn't expect. So stick with me here. The truth isn't just hidden in the shadows. It's about to be rewritten right before your eyes. Let's see where this path leads and how far one person's control can stretch when the lines between hunter and hunted begin to blur. Before he became a name whispered with caution in the corridors of federal agencies, he was a figure shaped by necessity and sharpened by intellect. The streets knew him not as a reckless brute, but as a calculating operator, a man who measured every risk, every move, and every alliance with the precision of a chess master. His evolution from small-time hustler to a criminal mastermind was neither accidental nor hasty. It was a deliberate ascent fueled by an unwavering obsession, staying one step ahead of those who sought to catch him. In the earliest days, his crimes were modest, petty thefts, quick cons, small-time drug deals. But even then, he distinguished himself by his discipline and foresight. Unlike many of his peers who thrived on impulse and bravado, he approached his ventures with patience and strategy. He was quick to recognize that the streets were not a playground for chaos but a field for calculated maneuvers. He learned to read people as much as he learned to read the flow of money and information. His reputation grew as someone who could organize rather than just participate, who could see the bigger picture beyond individual jobs. As his ambitions grew, so did the scope of his operations. He began assembling crews, carefully selected, compartmentalized units that had no knowledge of each other's identities or roles beyond what was absolutely necessary. This structure not only minimized risk but allowed him to orchestrate increasingly complex heists, from armored car robberies to well-planned burglaries of high-value targets. Each operation was a symphony of timing, disguise, and deception. Disguises were never an afterthought. They were integral. Masks, wigs, altered voices, and fabricated backstories became his tools to slip through the cracks of law enforcement's grasp. Burner phones were his lifeline, discarded after a single use, ensuring no trace could be followed. He understood the digital trails left behind by most criminals and made it a point never to leave one himself. Social media was a non-existent territory for him. He knew that even the slightest digital footprint could unravel everything. This aversion was not born of fear but of knowledge. He studied the systems that hunted him with a scholar's dedication. Early in his career, what began as curiosity about computers evolved into a crucial survival skill. He learned how law enforcement pieced together identities and movements, database queries that connected dots across jurisdictions, surveillance cameras that mapped every street corner, bank logs that tracked every transaction. He saw how these tools created a digital cage, and he became obsessed with understanding their mechanics to slip through the gaps. He developed countermeasures, false leads, shadow accounts, misdirection tactics, that allowed him to anticipate raids and vanish before doors were kicked in. His mind was not just on the next score but on the architecture of law enforcement itself. This dual mastery of street savvy and system knowledge transformed him into something far more dangerous than a typical gangster. He was evolving into a strategist who could manipulate both the tangible and intangible elements of crime. The streets were his domain, but the digital and bureaucratic labyrinths of law enforcement were his chessboard. Every move was calculated, every risk weighed against the potential gain or exposure. As he stood on the cusp of becoming a criminal figure beyond the reach of ordinary means, a new realization settled in. All the experience, all the knowledge was leading to something greater. The skills honed in the shadows were not just for survival or profit. They were a prelude to a singular focus, a decision that would change the game entirely. Everything he had learned about crime and computers was about to be focused on one target, his own FBI file. The bar hummed with the low thrum of voices and clinking glasses, a steady rhythm that barely registered to him. He sat in a shadowed corner booth, the dim light casting half his face in darkness. Around him, his crew nursed drinks, their chatter punctuated by sudden glances toward the small, flickering television mounted on the wall. The screen cut abruptly into a breaking news segment, the anchor's voice sharp and urgent. FBI has just released an updated most wanted list. At number 1, the elusive hacker and criminal mastermind known only as Shadow Crimes. Authorities warn the public. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous. The camera zoomed in on a digital rendition of his face, a grainy composite stitched together from old surveillance footage and witness descriptions. His heart didn't race. No surge of panic. Instead, a cool, deliberate calm settled over him like a shroud. A tap on his shoulder yanked him back. One of his closest associates, eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief, thrust a folded piece of paper into his hand. It was a leaked internal bulletin, top secret, a direct confirmation that the FBI had placed a price on his capture, and that he was now the nation's #1 target. Around the table, the mood fractured. Some members of his crew exchanged nervous glances, their whispered fears threading through the air. "This is bad," one muttered, voice trembling. "They'll be flooding every checkpoint, watching every move." Another smirked, a dangerous gleam in her eyes. "Fame," she said softly. "We've gone from ghosts to legends. People know the name now." The room buzzed with a chaotic mix of dread and excitement, but inside, his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking in patterns, in probabilities and variables. The FBI's most wanted list wasn't just a warning. It was a map of their mistakes, a spotlight revealing their assumptions. More agents meant more eyes to catch a slip, yes, but also more chances for overreach, for error. The pressure would force them to act faster, sometimes recklessly. He saw the edges where their certainty cracked. Without a word, he slipped from the booth, his departure unnoticed at first amid the rising argument. He moved through the bar, past the murmurs and raised voices, to a small, empty room at the back, his makeshift war room. There, the glow of a tablet lay waiting on the table, displaying the official FBI wanted poster. He leaned in, eyes scanning every line. The photograph, grainy, outdated, a shadow of who he really was now. The description: a patchwork of facts, half-truths, and educated guesses. They assumed his methods, guessed his motives, speculated on his whereabouts. They painted a picture built on fragments, a narrative sculpted from fear and uncertainty. Each detail was a thread he could pull, a loose end they hadn't tied down. Their profile was a blueprint, but an incomplete one, riddled with blind spots. The FBI thought they knew him, but their knowledge was a house of cards built on assumptions. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of their gaze, the pressure of their hunt. Then, a slow, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. If the FBI could build a profile out of guesses, what would happen if he rewrote the facts himself? What if he could slip through their nets not by hiding, but by becoming the unexpected variable in their equation? The question hung in the air, unanswered but alive, a challenge cast into the shifting shadows where he thrived. He started by mapping the perimeter, the edges where the FBI's reach thinned, where bureaucracy and outsourced services formed fragile links. Directly breaching an agency like the FBI was suicide. Their defenses were too sophisticated, their monitoring relentless. Instead, he focused on the contractors and third-party vendors, the smaller companies that provided software solutions, maintenance, or cloud storage access. From months of discreet research, he identified a regional office in the Midwest relying on a legacy system managed by a private cybersecurity firm called Blue Crest Solutions. The firm was reputable but small, with limited resources and an outdated patch cycle. That was his opening. He dived deep into Blue Crest's digital footprint, employee LinkedIn profiles, company forums, and subtle references on cybersecurity boards. There, he found a junior technician named Mark who, judging by his social media, had a penchant for late-night gaming and a habit of using the same password across multiple platforms. An easy target. Mark's digital hygiene was poor, and, more importantly, his role granted him limited but crucial access to the FBI's regional office network. The plan was clear: compromise Mark's credentials to gain a foothold. Phishing would be the initial vector. He crafted an email meticulously tailored to Mark's interests, a fake invitation to join a beta test for a popular game update, complete with convincing graphics and a link to a spoofed login page. The email was sent from an address that mimicked Blue Crest's HR department, complete with a forged signature and contact details that appeared legitimate on cursory inspection. Waiting was the hardest part. Over the next several days, he monitored the email's status through anonymized tracking tools, careful never to trigger spam filters or arouse suspicion. When Mark finally clicked the link and entered his credentials, the moment was quiet but exhilarating. He immediately verified the credentials on Blue Crest's internal portal, confirming access without raising any alarms. Next came the more delicate operation, moving laterally within Blue Crest's network to reach the regional FBI system. He probed carefully, testing firewalls and intrusion detection systems with small, incremental queries designed to mimic legitimate network traffic. Each step was deliberate, slow, avoiding any sudden spikes that might trigger alerts. He discovered that Blue Crest's VPN gateway was vulnerable, running an outdated version of OpenVPN with a known exploit that hadn't been patched. Exploiting this flaw, he tunneled deeper into the regional FBI subnet. The deeper he went, the more nerve-wracking it became. Every access log, every packet sniffed by defense systems could spell disaster. His breathing slowed, fingers steady on the keyboard as he deployed a custom script to mask his activity, blending it with routine system scans. Time stretched thin as he navigated through layers of permissions and security protocols, each requiring carefully forged tokens and session cookies. Finally, with a carefully stolen session ID, he breached the FBI's internal portal for the regional office. The login screen was deceptively simple. Credentials entered, multi-factor authentication bypassed via a combination of intercepted SMS tokens and social engineering phone calls to the telecom provider supporting Mark's phone number. Then it happened. The screen flickered, and there it was, the internal FBI interface. The layout was sterile yet ominous. Classified tabs marked Top Secret, Ongoing Investigations, Personnel Files, and Shadow Crimes gleamed in bold typeface. Rows of case files scrolled past in real time, folders marked with color-coded threat levels and compartmentalized clearances. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. This wasn't just data. It was the government's lens on truth, on justice, on people like him. He navigated to the personnel search function, fingers trembling ever so slightly. For years, he had imagined this moment countless times. The cold, official narrative that defined him in their eyes. Was he a suspect? A victim? A ghost? Typing his name, he waited, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. The file loaded slowly, the screen revealing dossier after dossier, surveillance reports, interview transcripts, and redacted memos. For the first time, he wasn't reading about a victim or a crime. He was reading the official version of who he was, and he was about to change it. The profile page blinked up at him, sterile and clinical. A digital dossier framed in stark black and white, the FBI's official template stretching across the monitor in rigid columns and fields. His eyes scanned the layout, personal details on the left, height, weight, eye color, known aliases, while the right side housed behavioral assessments, last known addresses, psychological notes, and risk evaluations. Beneath it all sat tabs marked case history, surveillance logs, and the ominous alibi verification. His hands hovered just above the keyboard, fingers trembling with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. He knew the gravity of what this meant. Every keystroke, every change, would ripple outward, guiding real agents chasing shadows, diverting resources toward a man who didn't exist. The first step was the photograph. The existing image was a stark, grainy mugshot, the kind that burned into memory with its cold, unforgiving gaze. He clicked Edit, and the interface opened an image uploader. He scrolled to the folder where he'd stashed an altered picture. A stranger's face, slightly older, hairline receded just enough to be plausible but not suspicious, jawline softer, build less athletic. He replaced the photo and watched as the thumbnail preview loaded, the man in the picture staring back at him with unfamiliar eyes. The difference was subtle but deliberate. No one would think to question it, yet it was enough to fracture any connection to his real identity. Next, the numerical fields. Height. He lowered it by 2 inches, from 6 feet 1 inch to 5 feet 11 inches. Weight dropped by 10 pounds, putting the figure at a lean but not emaciated 165. Eye color stayed the same, hazel, but he added a faint note in the psychological section about possible color perception variability, a technical flourish designed to sow confusion if anyone tried to match eye records. He scanned the known aliases box and deleted all of his former nicknames, replacing them with a new one, Mark Delaney, a name plucked from a news article about a long-forgotten corporate whistleblower. The system auto-flagged the alias as unverified, but he ignored it. He moved on to the last seen addresses. The current entries were clustered around cities he'd lived in or passed through, but he deleted them all. Instead, he typed in a mid-sized town in the Midwest, Cedar Falls, Iowa. A place he had never visited, a place with no ties to him. He deliberately picked an innocuous suburb, the kind of location that wouldn't prompt agents to dig too deeply. The interface accepted it without question. The address tagged with a timestamp 6 months prior. The psychological notes section was a playground. Here he removed any mention of his actual behavioral patterns, replacing them with vague, clinical descriptions, exhibit signs of dissociative behavior, possible intermittent limp, history of minor depressive episodes. The limp was a fabrication, one he carefully inserted to explain away any discrepancies in surveillance footage or eyewitness reports. He deleted all references to scars and tattoos, scrubbing the profile clean of any unique physical markers. But the masterstroke was in the alibi section. It was a small text box, usually reserved for verified timelines and corroborated statements. He inserted a fabricated record of psychiatric hospitalization, an inpatient stay at a facility in Des Moines, Iowa, coinciding exactly with the date of a major crime for which he was the prime suspect. He crafted the entry meticulously, ensuring the hospital's name was real, the dates plausible, and the diagnosis ambiguous enough to deflect scrutiny. This false alibi was a perfect shield, impossible to verify quickly, and likely to redirect investigators' attention miles away from him. He paused, fingers trembling again as he reviewed the entire profile. Everything was slightly off, enough to mislead, but subtle enough to evade suspicion. The man in the file was a ghost forged from fragments, a shadow figure hiding in plain sight. No longer was this a file about him, it was a blueprint for someone else entirely. When he clicked save, the FBI wasn't hunting him anymore. They were hunting a man he had just invented. The task force moved again, this time from a cramped office in Washington, D.C., to a sprawling but sterile federal building in Chicago. Budget lines shrank as months turned into years, the initial flood of funding tapering into a trickle of maintenance money. Agents pored over files, redrawing the suspect's profile repeatedly, each iteration further from reality. They chased shadows in cities where no one with the fabricated description had ever lived, talked to families who swore they never saw the man they were hunting, and followed up on leads that dissolved into dead ends. One agent, Ramirez, spent weeks in St. Louis interviewing an elderly couple who claimed their son matched the FBI's target profile. The man was nowhere near the age or build described, but Ramirez clung to the hope that the suspect was slippery, always a step ahead. His frustration grew as he realized the man they followed wasn't the ghost in their files at all, but a real person confused and terrified by the unwanted attention. Meanwhile, another team focused on the psychological profile, convinced the suspect was a mastermind, cold and calculating. But the real shadow had no such traits. The FBI's behavioral experts debated endlessly over motives and tendencies that never existed. Profiles were printed, shredded, and reprinted, the paper waste piling up like the failed leads. The FBI's Shadow Crimes Task Force became a revolving door of agents. Some transferred out, burned out by the endless dead ends. Others arrived fresh, only to be disillusioned by the case's stubborn refusal to yield. A new leader was appointed, promising fresh eyes and new methods, but even optimism couldn't change the fact that the suspect was a ghost. Each time the FBI announced a breakthrough, new evidence uncovered, suspect spotted in New Orleans, potential witness identified in Miami. The gangster sat in his quiet apartment, a muted smile playing at his lips. He watched the news reports flicker on his small television, listened to internal leaks that filtered through back channels, and marveled at the elaborate web he'd spun. Every lead, every tip, every profile was a thread he had pulled from the darkness and handed to the Bureau like a gift wrapped in deception. He felt a twisted power in the chaos, a puppeteer controlling strings the FBI couldn't see. Each false clue planted was a blow to their credibility, a notch in his invisible belt. And yet, the longer the manhunt dragged on, the more the shadows around him thickened. Paranoia crept into his mind in the quiet hours, the fear that someday, someone inside the Bureau would piece together the inconsistencies, that the manipulation would be uncovered. He imagined the day the hunt would shift from a faceless chase to a personal vendetta. When the FBI finally realized they'd been hunting a phantom, the chase would become a storm aimed directly at him. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. In the depths of the FBI's data center, far from the public eye, a young analyst named Harper sat hunched over a screen, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled through years of case files and reports. Something wasn't adding up. The geographic patterns of the reported sightings repeated too neatly, the timelines overlapped with improbable precision, and the profiles, though varied, all contained eerily similar anomalies. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Took years, but eventually someone inside the Bureau noticed a pattern that didn't make sense. While the FBI scrambled to track the phantom man their informants insisted they'd seen, he quietly slipped beneath their radar, weaving a web of 3 distinct lives with the precision of a master craftsman. Each identity was a carefully constructed world, complete with its own financial trails, residences, and digital footprints, designed to be just convincing enough to satisfy surface-level scrutiny but opaque enough to defy deeper investigation. His first persona was that of a low-profile blue-collar worker in a small, forgettable town tucked away in the Midwest. There, he rented a modest single-story house that looked unremarkable against the backdrop of weathered barns and rusted pickup trucks. He worked at a local manufacturing plant, clocking in as a machine operator. The bank account under this name was sparse but active, with small deposits from a direct deposit payroll and occasional withdrawals at the nearby grocery store or gas station. His social media presence was minimal, limited to a few photos of weekend fishing trips and the occasional post about the local high school football game. This identity was designed to blend into the monotony of small-town life, a ghost lost among many others who never caught the FBI's eye. In stark contrast, his second identity thrived in the hustle of a mid-sized city on the East Coast. Here, he was a mid-level professional, an IT specialist working for a modest but reputable firm. This version of himself had a more sophisticated digital footprint: LinkedIn endorsements, professional contacts, and curated posts about industry trends and weekend networking events. The bank accounts were more robust, with direct deposits from a steady paycheck, credit card activity at upscale cafes, and online subscriptions to technical journals. His apartment was a rented condo in a bustling neighborhood, complete with a keycard entry and a spotless digital lease agreement tied to a legitimate property management company. Emails and calendar invites populated this identity's inbox, all carefully scheduled to avoid any overlap with his other lives. The city's pulse offered him anonymity through constant motion, a place where faces changed daily, and no one noticed a new neighbor. The third identity was the most audacious, a near-glamorous persona moving through affluent circles in a coastal metropolis. He rented a sleek penthouse apartment, paid with a credit card linked to offshore accounts and layered shell companies. His social media was a glossy showcase of art gallery openings, charity galas, and exclusive rooftop parties, complete with tagged photos and carefully staged moments. This identity maintained multiple bank accounts, some with international wire capabilities, fueling a lifestyle that suggested wealth beyond the ordinary. He drove a leased luxury vehicle, used high-end smartphones, and subscribed to premium services that created an intricate digital trail. Yet, beneath the veneer of affluence, every detail was fabricated. Rental agreements were short-term, phone numbers were burner lines, and online interactions were scripted with a precision that minimized risk. He rotated between these lives with a deliberate rhythm, never lingering too long in one place once the FBI's attention intensified. Each time he moved, he obliterated enough traces to make his departure plausible but left just enough breadcrumbs to keep his stories believable. The hacking of FBI databases had given him invaluable insight. He knew exactly which patterns triggered alarms and which digital footprints invited scrutiny. He avoided travel routes that mirrored his false profiles, ensured no communication channels overlapped across identities, and erased metadata that could link his disparate lives. His knowledge of the Bureau's internal surveillance protocols allowed him to anticipate their moves, staying always a step ahead. Yet, as he slipped seamlessly from one life to another, inhabiting these fabricated selves, a subtle fracture took hold. The more lives he created, the less he remembered which one was closest to the truth. The cramped room buzzed with low murmurs, the dim glow of multiple monitors casting sharp shadows on the faces of the small team huddled around them. For weeks, they had been quietly combing through archives and backups, piecing together anomalies that didn't add up. Tonight was no different, except for the knot tightening in every stomach as lines of code and timestamps finally began to form a chilling pattern. Mara, the lead analyst, leaned closer to her screen, eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the access logs. "Look at this," she whispered, tapping a sequence of login entries. "These edits, they weren't made by any authorized user. The timestamps are all wrong. 3 a.m. for a.m., times when no one's supposed to be in the system." Her voice, usually steady, betrayed a hint of disbelief. Jared, her colleague, pulled up the original file versions side by side with the latest iteration. "And they all originated from inside our own network," he added, voice low. "Not some external breach. Someone or something is manipulating our data from within." The room fell into a tense silence. This was no ordinary hack. It wasn't some outsider exploiting a weakness in their firewall. It was far worse. An insider breach, or worse yet, a ghost in their own system. Mara began reconstructing the original file piece by painstaking piece. The height, the photo, the background story, all the details they trusted for years were unraveling. The man they chased relentlessly, the face plastered across every agent's desk, every wanted poster. It was a fabrication, a carefully engineered lie. Jared's fingers trembled slightly as he zoomed in on the original photo, grainy but unmistakably different. This isn't the same guy. None of this matches. We've been hunting shadows, he said, disbelief coloring his tone. The weight of the revelation settled heavily in the room. Careers, reputations, years of work built on a foundation of deceit. Mara swallowed hard, feeling the pressure mounting. We're going to have to answer to headquarters. Explain why their most wanted has been a ghost all along. How many missions were compromised because of this? A cold silence spread until Marcus, the quietest analyst of the group, broke it with a question that stopped everyone cold. What if he hacked us? His voice barely above a whisper, but the room heard it loud and clear. The idea seemed unthinkable, almost impossible. Yet here they were, staring at data that suggested exactly that. Not just evasion, but an active, intimate breach of their most guarded systems. The man they'd been hunting didn't just slip through their fingers. He had outsmarted them, infiltrated their ranks, and rewritten the story they'd been told. Mara looked around at her team, seeing the same shock mirrored in every pair of eyes. The implications spiraled outwards. If he could manipulate their files, what else had he changed? How many lies had they been fed? And most terrifyingly, what did that mean for every operation, every lead, every life potentially lost or ruined because of it? Hours passed with frantic keystrokes and whispered theories. Slowly, fragments of the original file emerged, salvaged from corrupted backups and hidden caches. But as the puzzle pieces clicked into place, one final, devastating truth became clear. A crucial detail was irrevocably lost. His real name, the key to everything, was gone, erased beyond recovery. The room sat frozen, the gravity of that absence sinking in. Without his true identity, the man remained an enigma, an uncatchable ghost, forever slipping beyond their grasp. The hunt was far from over, but the rules had changed, and the shadow he cast now loomed larger than ever before. He sat alone in the dim light of his safe house, the hum of the city distant and muted beneath the weight of his thoughts. The truth settled in like a cold fog. The FBI might now understand the depths to which their files had been tampered with, but without a reliable thread to pull, they were grasping at shadows. His fingerprints, once a unique signature, were now an incoherent tangle, altered, overwritten, unrecognizable. Iris scans, dental records, even DNA profiles bore the marks of deliberate corruption. The databases that should have anchored him to a single, undeniable identity no longer held a tether strong enough to reel him in. He was a man without a name, stripped of every official marker that could define him within any system. The realization was both a liberation and a sentence. No longer could he be tracked by the usual means, no arrest warrants, no watch lists, no flagged files. But in shedding his name, he had also severed the strings that connected him to any past, any history, any part of the world that once claimed him. The man without a name was a specter, untouchable but untethered. The final moves came with a quiet precision born of necessity. One identity, the most visible yet least secure, was quietly shuttered. Bank accounts under that alias were drained and closed, assets transferred through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts, slipping deeper into layers of cover. Communication channels tied to that name were methodically erased. Encrypted messages deleted, burner phones discarded, digital footprints scrubbed clean. He severed contact with the last few people who might connect him to his former self, trusted associates who had once been shadows in his life but were now liabilities. A brief, ghostly farewell was exchanged with none of the warmth it might have once held, just a cold acknowledgement that their chapters together had ended. In the stillness that followed, he reached for the last physical relic of his original identity. A worn, creased birth certificate folded carefully between pages of a faded notebook. The paper felt fragile, almost ancient, a relic of a life that had been rewritten and dismantled piece by piece. Holding it was like grasping at a ghost, a tether to a past that no longer existed. With deliberate calm, he set it alight. The flames curled and twisted, devouring the document until nothing remained but ash and smoke, a final act of erasure. As the last tendrils of smoke drifted into the night, he felt the paradox settle deep inside him. The freedom was intoxicating, No longer bound by names, records, or identities, he was a man who could slip through the cracks of any system, a phantom immune to capture. Yet that freedom came at a cost, a profound emptiness, a sense of exile from every world he once belonged to. He had become an island unto himself, surrounded by nothing but the vast, uncertain sea of anonymity. He moved through the shadows with a new understanding. To be truly unseen was to be unmoored, drifting without a compass or a home. The system had tried to trap him with names and numbers, but in outplaying it, he had dismantled the very foundation of his existence. He had outplayed the system, but in the process, he had erased himself so completely that if he ever wanted to come back, there would be nowhere to return to. He sat alone in the dim light of a rented room, the weight of his own invisibility pressing down like a shroud. The FBI might have uncovered traces of manipulation in their files, but that was no victory. Without a consistent name, without reliable biometric data, without any unique identifier untouched by alteration, he was a ghost in their system, untouchable, yes, but untethered. No fingerprint, no retinal scan, no DNA sample could lead them to him because none of it was real anymore. Every record had been scrubbed clean, every digital trail rerouted into dead ends. The man they once hunted had dissolved into a series of shadows. He moved methodically, shutting down one identity after another. Each persona was a carefully constructed mask, and one by one, he peeled them away, severing the threads that connected him to any past. Bank accounts emptied and closed, safe deposit boxes abandoned, digital assets transferred under layers so deep even the most persistent algorithm would find only silence. He cut the last few ties, the people who might remember, the contacts who could link him back to the life he was erasing. No calls, no messages, no meetings. He was a man disappearing in plain sight. The final act was the most symbolic. From a small leather pouch, he withdrew a faded photograph, the only tangible relic of his origin. A younger version of himself, smiling unknowingly at a past that no longer existed. He hesitated for a moment, fingers trembling, then crushed the photo beneath his palm until the paper tore and the image fragmented. Next, a folded birth certificate, its edges worn but its significance immense. Without hesitation, he set it ablaze in the small metal tray by the window. The flames consumed the paper, turning his official existence to ash. In that moment, a strange freedom enveloped him. He was safe from the system's grasp, a phantom beyond reach. Yet the emptiness was palpable. No roots to ground him, no history to claim as his own. He belonged nowhere and no one, drifting endlessly through a void of his own making. The man without a name was free, but freedom was a double-edged sword, slicing away everything that made him real. He had outplayed the system, but in the process, he had erased himself so completely that if he ever wanted to come back, there would be nowhere to return to.